Thank you again for being part of this conversation about how to fuel the fire. To kind of back up way back to the beginning, Paul talks about keeping your spiritual fervor, your enthusiasm, your zeal, and he encourages Christians to do that. So we're talking about how to do that. And Jesus, in his letters to the seven churches, talks about Laodicea and being lukewarm, neither hot or cold, so he wants to spit them out of his mouth. And so that sort of a serious warning that we really need to be fired up. And Paul's instructions to a young Timothy to fan into flame the gift of God that was in him. And so we have these images about being fired up, and we know what that means. And we talked about this idea of having it way back at the beginning of this conversation. We've had it before in this church. We have felt that, and we have been on fire, and we have had explosive growth at times. Not as much lately. And so we're talking about how to rekindle that, individually for each of us, but as a group. Of course, as we rekindle one, we rekindle the other. If we as a group get more excited, I think individuals who might not originally be a part of that will be pulled into that. And, kind of like wood put on a fire, they'll get ignited too. But individually, if just a few people start to get fired up, it begins to spread like a fire, like a wildfire. And so that's our goal in this conversation. Admittedly, there aren't all that many of us, as far as I can tell, who are following along and watching the videos, fewer still who are commenting. But my prayer is that God will take those of us who are and begin to build a flame that will spread, and that this will become a movement within this church and this community and perhaps beyond. I told you yesterday, I don't know how to do all of that. I don't know the best way, and I'm not sure what we're willing to do. I really think that most any way or strategy or plan will work if we'll work. And so it may be that what we're willing to do is the more important question. And so I want to talk just for a second about doing evangelism in the 21st century. How do we connect with people who are unchurched, uncertain, unloved, and more importantly, unsaved? Paul wrote to the church in Rome, and in the first chapter says, I am not ashamed of the gospel, the good news of Jesus, for it is the power of God for salvation. Inherent in that is there's a need for salvation. People are lost, people are doomed, they need to be rescued, and it's the good news of Jesus that Paul says will do that. When he wrote to the Corinthian church, he says, I resolve to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Nothing elaborate, no complicated message. It's all about the good news of Jesus, knowing Jesus and Him crucified. Paul believed that God's power resided in that message, and it would change lives and hearts and communities and the world. And history has proven him right. And so I believe the same is true for us. If we'll just keep putting the message out there and tell people the good news of Jesus, some of them will flat out reject it. Some people will slam the door in our faces. But some seed will fall on good soil. It was that way when Jesus shared the message. It was that way when the first disciples did and when Paul did. It will always be that way. And so I guess the key is not to find something that works and reaches everybody. The key is just to find a way to share the same message, knowing that it will reach some. For the Jews in the first century, the connecting point was they were looking for a Messiah. They were looking for kingdom. And so when somebody like Matthew wrote his gospel, his good news, he talked about Messiah and he talked about kingdom. That's what everybody around him was excited about and interested in. Paul comes along and begins to take the message to non-Jewish people, to the Gentile world, the Roman world, and he changes the message, not the core or the content or the events, but he starts talking to people about, let me tell you about the unknown God. And he says, I've become all things to all men. To the Jews, he says, I'll live like a Jew and talk like a Jew, but to the Gentiles, I'll live and talk like a Gentile. Whatever it takes to connect with the audience where I am. That's not being wishy-washy, that's just being smart. It's still the message, the good news of Jesus, that Jesus came, He died and was raised, and as the Son of God, His resurrection provides us with grace and forgiveness and life that lasts forever. That'll still teach, that'll still preach. We just have to figure out what's the best way to get people's attention in our culture. we have, and I've said this before, but I think it's worth repeating, we have for a long, long time focused on inviting people to church, which is, I think, a lot like inviting people to buy a golf membership at a golf club when they don't play golf. The majority of our society is not churched. They're not going to church, and inviting them to church probably won't get us anywhere. If you can get somebody who doesn't play golf interested in playing golf, and if they can figure out this is fun or it's rewarding in some way, then they might want a membership. And the same thing's true for Jesus and for Christianity. If we get people interested in Jesus and what he has to provide, church kind of follows along. So we're back at those questions. I haven't had a chance to go over your responses to yesterday's questions, and so I'm kind of asking them again, and I'll catch up and we'll spend some more time talking. But what do you think is a good way for us to tell the basic message so that we're not being ashamed of the gospel of Jesus? Be glad to hear what you have to say. I hope you'll share some things in the comments. I'd like for this to be an ongoing conversation, and so I'll be looking at those, and the next time we get together, we'll spend some time kind of looking over and maybe bouncing off the things that you've had to say. Thanks a lot.